Oh my God, I've started already. Well, I wasn't expecting that to happen. I was expecting it to wait until I pressed a button, but here we are. This is a thing called Mark's NOTCAST. Some of you won't have seen this before. This is number 428. And in these, I talk about a record and a period of time, normally relating to my history. And a record that I like, stuff that was happening in my life and happening in the band's life at the time. I spent 47 minutes last week talking about how Blur's fourth studio record, The Great Escape, was, according to one of my friends, yes, I have friends, a bit shit. Today, it is the 24th of February, 1995. No, it isn't. No, it's 24th of February 2025. No, I'm talking about the Oasis and their second album, What's the Story? Morning Glory. Yes, this is an original creation edition from 1995. Unlike, by the way, in the 10 or so months since I last did an Oasis one, this version of Definitely Maybe, which is a Big Brother reissue. And I should point out, by the way, for the train spotters amongst you, and I'm sure there are some of you out there, the inner sleeves on the Big Brother versions are different. So there you go. 3 for £66 from HMV, and frankly, I felt like treating myself because after the February I've had, I deserved it. Whoosh, hair wish, because you're worth it. So, let's get deep into What's the Story, Morning Glory. All your dreams are made when you chain to the mirror and the razor blade. Now, that is a lyric which obviously is about the great cocaine, the Bolivian marching powder, or whatever else it's going to be. But if there was ever a band that was designed for the mirror and the razor blades, it would have been Oasis. And of course, the format of choice is the CD, which when you open it up and turn it around, looks oddly enough like a mirror. There you can see an infinite hall of mirrors that is myself in there. Put a bit of white on that, have a sniff. Everyone does drugs like a Sunday morning, isn't it, according to Noel Gallagher, the endlessly quotable leader of the Oasis. Let's start. This is probably the biggest selling record that I have in my record collection. I don't even know how many copies it sold. I'm guessing 15 million, maybe. That's a lot. It's like the Thriller for sad boys in anoraks and Parker jackets, Parker monkeys. But we start off a little ahead of the release of the album. Southend, 17th of April, 1995. The recording of Live by the Sea. One of the last shows played by the band's original drummer, Tony McCarroll. The first Oasis show to be officially filmed and released here on DVD, also on VHS. The band's last headline show in theatres before they went to arenas in the UK, and then went to stadiums, and then finally played venues the size of the goddamn moon. This was Tony's last weeks in the band, and just before this had happened, the band went into the studio and recorded the first fruits from the second album here on CD single, Some Might Say. This is the UK edition. This is the Japanese edition. The UK edition has 4 songs on it. In fact, it's one of the best EPs ever released, which is Some Might Say, Talk Tonight, Acquiesce, and Head Shrinker. At least 3 of those played on a regular basis up to the last few weeks of Oasis's existence. And the photograph there taken at a disused railway station. So no doubt train spotters of the world will be pleased with that knowledge. Apparently, it's now an Airbnb and you can stay there. It probably cost a fortune. No idea why, but it does.
Are you not recording yet?
And there you go. So Southend and the show in Sheffield was where you first heard songs from Morning Glory played live. So this features Some Might Say, Acquiesce, Head Shrinker, Talk Tonight, all the songs on the just about to be released Some Might Say EP. And at the weekend, that is the Saturday when they played Sheffield Arena, they added a song called Don't Look Back in Anger to the setlist, played acoustically by Sir Noel of Gallagher. This was the moment where I think Oasis went from being a very, very promising indie band to suddenly you were like going, yeah, they're going to be huge. You could see it happening. And I've been part of bands' fandoms when that's happened. When you've seen a band ride the crest of a wave and become enormous, and suddenly they're not your band anymore. They're everybody's band. And actually, I never think that music should be just for the elite and the train spotters that only like certain things and go, no, name 3 songs by Superdry, that type of thing. You kind of go, right, okay, so music should be for everybody. It should speak to everybody. The bands I love, I want them all to be huge and playing stadiums, because that means loads of people firstly have one, great taste, and secondly, the things that the music does to me, it does to other people, and that's actually a really good thing. Because to me, music is the map that shows me the way through life when sometimes I feel a little bit lost, and feels like a constant companion. As you probably gather by the fact that I've done 400 of these talking to my mobile phone about stuff. What else do we say? There's so much more to say, isn't there? Just even about these 3 or 4 songs on the Some Might Say EP. The main thing that happened is that in between the first and the second appearance on Top of the Pops, to promote Some Might Say, the band sacked their drummer, Tony. I'm sure he's a lovely person. He's not the best drummer on the planet. And the man were going, well, there was a bit during the recording of it where I think somebody in the studio, they kind of slather the chorus firstly, and Some Might Say, in echo on the vocals to make it less obvious that Tony sped up in between bars in parts of the song. Second thing that they did is that they asked Tony to get drum lessons, and he didn't. So Tony was starting to lose his timing. The songs were going to places he couldn't play. As a drummer, every drummer has a certain skill set. They have a certain set of things they're good at. They're quite good at. Not amazing, quite good. But if you go beyond that, you hear drum fills and you go, the guy can't do it. That's just not in his skill set. It's like asking someone who's great at golf to take up water polo, for example. Same thing. Hitting things with balls and getting them into things. Different skill set. And Tony's drumming just couldn't match it. When you listen to the B-sides, Acquiesce, which originally was planned to be an A-side, frankly, no one was churning him out at such a great speed that here's the next 4 songs that I've written. Here's Acquiesce, Talk Tonight, Head Drinker, Some Might Say, and you kind of go, well, actually, you should maybe hold back Acquiesce and Talk Tonight for an album. Nah, the songs are just going to keep coming. For example, although that wasn't, as we later found out, actually true. And then we also had Some Might Say, which was the band's best A-side, certainly to date. Possibly not their best A-side ever, because that's coming up shortly, Pod Pickers. But certainly the best A-side to date, which means better than Whatever and better than Live Forever. Just each individual line, like a lot of the lines on the songs, doesn't make any sense on it in terms of a whole narrative, but you put them all together and you've got a series of individual lines that do kind of make sense. Or some site might say there's no such thing as heaven, go and tell it to the man who lives in hell, for example. Those 2 lines, fine, that sounds like a quote that you get or out of a book of quotations, and what you had was a record that just worked and is great. It's one of the best 4-track EPs ever, even better than Metallica's Beyond Magnetic. We have Talk Tonight, which was written about a missing weekend. So in the many, many mythologising documentaries about Oasis, the Knebworth one, the Supersonic, the Definitely Maybe DVD, Noel packed his bags and went to join the circus, fed up with Liam's gross unprofessionalism. And this is where, by the way, I use the phrase gross unprofessionalism because it appears in this book, Was There Then, A Photographic Journey, by Jill Furmanowski, which described Liam as grossly unprofessional, which is a very nice way of saying a drunken arse. And sometimes when you're around people that behave like that, you kind of go, I don't want to be around people that behave like that. That's not the kind of person I need in my life. The problem is when he's your brother and when you're in a band with him, it's difficult to sack the dude. And as somebody who has problematic brothers, I know exactly what it's like to be with people that, or be around people you don't especially like sometimes. So, last B-side is Head Shrinker, which was written in 1993. Clearly left over, not necessarily held back, more, I've got this song, we'll do it. And we do it. And then there you have it, the EP. The band played Top of the Pops. They sacked Tony. And they were then like, oh, we're on Top of the Pops next week. we haven't got a drummer. Who are we going to get? Well, Noel was in a rehearsal studio and he heard the drummer through a wall. He was like, he's good. Who's that? So I was like, that's Alan. As it handily turns out, that was Alan White. Alan White was also the brother of Steve White. Steve White was also the drummer for the Style Council, and for a long period of time, Paul Weller. Steve White is a great drummer. Alan White, he's a great drummer too. Different, more jazzy, more geared towards punctuation than standard meat and potatoes, but a very good drummer. And when he joined the band, he lifted the band in terms of their abilities. So the cliche is, like a classroom, every band can only go as fast as its slowest member. Tony was the slowest member of Oasis, and Alan was not. He was the fastest member. He was technically probably the best member of the group at that point. Having him in power suddenly put a sports car engine and power underneath the hood of the band and made them be able to go to places they just couldn't have got to with Tony in the band. So his first appearance was on Top of the Pops, of all places, which is pretty surprising. If your first job in a band is to play on Top of the Pops, often that's your only job with the band. But luckily, that changed. We had a number of things that were going on with the band around about this time. Firstly, everybody knew they were about to become absolutely enormous and inescapable. The second thing that was going to happen is that the band were touring, and they were touring big places. So they went from playing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon at Glastonbury to headlining Glastonbury. They went from playing Dublin Castle to supporting REM at Slane in Ireland. They were becoming a hefty live act, headlining places, as I said, Glastonbury, Roskilde, places like that. And they went into the studio and they had this next album. This is the one, What's the Story, Morning Glory. Originally, by the way, titled Flash in the Pan, because the idea was to take the piss out of the idea that Oasis were not going to be here forever. They were going to be bin and gone in the blink of an eye. But what you have here is the second album, the difficult second album. The Sex Pistols couldn't do a difficult second album. Other bands obviously have struggled with second albums. I dread to think who they are right now. I tend to like bands that make more than one record. That's good. But this was the one where it was the proof. You spend 18 years writing your first album and 6 months writing your next one. And by the time this came out, by the way, obviously there were songs that were already written and stacked and packed and ready for the third record. So there was going to be a long time to come. This was a confident record, and one that clearly knew not only what it was going to do, but what it was going to be. It was going to be a big album. Sometimes you can just tell. The problem with this is not that there's anything wrong with it. It's just not quite as good as it could have been, which, coming from me, considering you look at the summer of 1995 and you think that's the summer of, quote, Britpop, unquote. That's the summer of Elastica, Blur, Oasis, the Stone Roses, Suede are touring, Pulp are just on the rise. It's a big summer for Britain. And then this feels like it's going to be the leader of the pack. This isn't, by the way, my favourite Britpop album. It's not even my fourth favourite Britpop album. It's probably my third, behind, respectively, Pulp's Different Class and Suede's Dogman Star. Or coming up, depending on when you want to think about it. Works. But all the stars were aligned at this point. There was an air of new lavishness that had come in. Yeah, I spent 40 minutes talking about Knebworth about 4 years ago, going on about how the gigs were full of idiotic meathead guys that were, used to punch you at school, that suddenly were in your safe spaces. That was my experience of it. At the same point, there was an element of going, at last, all the things which I have thought have been good and talented and decent in music. Yeah, Oasis were a little bit meat and potatoes. They were a little bit kind of like the grey paint on the wall of rock and roll, a little bit bland. But good God, compared to Simply Red, it was like the difference between looking at, George and Mildred and Shaft. It was miles away. This was so much better than that. And I was like, well, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And that's absolutely fine. The band went into the studio, Rockfield Studios in Wales, and recorded furiously and came out with the results from LP number 2. And LP number 2 was had a precursor of a coming up single, the seventh Oasis single, Roll With It. Here's an original creation, 7-inch. Here's the CD single. I think that was taken on the beach at Bath, actually. And this is where we have the Blur versus Oasis #1 battle for supremacy. And the battle for supremacy was quite simple. Who was going to be #1? Was it going to be Oasis, the plucky working class underdogs, or was it going to be Blur, the lovely kind of like well-to-do, Kinks-inspired band led by the Damon Albans? Well, it came down to two things. Blur got the #1. But Blur got the #1 for three reasons. One, Blur did 2 CDs and a 7-inch and a cassette. Oasis, they did a CD, a 12-inch, a 7-inch. So they did 3 formats, Blur did 4. Blur's second CD featured 4 live tracks on it, all being previous hit singles. And Blur was cheaper. So Blur was at £1.99 for a CD. Oasis was at £2.99. A Blur 7-inch was 99p and Oasis one was £1.99. If you were of the age when you had to manage your money and you were buying CD singles, because of course you were also in the point where you had to think, how much money have I got? What can I afford? You weren't going to buy 2 copies of the Oasis single. You were going to buy 1 copy of the Oasis single just for the B-sides. And you were going to buy 2 copies of the Blur one because there was different B-sides on there, wasn't there? It also came down to dealer price. So Blur at 99p for the 7-inch and the CD for £1.99 also came in at 1.1, which meant that it was £1.34 plus VAT per single with approximately 12p profit at £1.99. But you also got a +1 on that, which means that the dealers could get them in much cheaper. They could sell them for cheaper. Oasis, £1.99 got you the 7-inch. The 7-inch had 2 tracks on it. It had Roll With It, and it was backed with It's Better People. And then on the CD, of course, you've got the extra tracks. You've got Rocking Chair and Live Forever, live at Glastonbury, 1995. But for the CD was on a 3+1 for Oasis. It was £2.2 plus 51p VAT. And that meant that it cost £2.53 for a dealer to stick it on the shelves. It sold for £2.99. A dealer got approximately 43 pence profit. And that meant that they weren't going to order quite so many because the capital investment was higher. The record shops were running quite tight. And then, of course, from a punter's perspective, £2.99 got you 3 Oasis songs and a live track. £3.99 got you 3 Blur songs plus 4 live songs. And it counted as 2 chart sales. No wonder that even though Oasis were 270,000 copies and Blur were 214,000 copies midweek, Oasis were #1 midweek, but Blur got to #1. And that was part of it. Roll With It is crap. It's not a great song at all. It's a collection of verbal gibberish wrapped up inside a quite interesting backing track. But it's not amazing. It absolutely isn't. And at this point, who was going to sell the papers? Kurt was dead. It was Oasis versus Blur. And you had these 4 cheeky chappies from Essex that were well behaved. And you had these 5 cheeky scallywags from Manchester that did things like get drunk, punch photographers. They were going to rule the newspapers. And newspapers were in the business of what song. Oasis weren't really a band at this point, even though they were. They became celebrities. And they didn't necessarily want to be celebrities. That's just who they became. If that was the byproduct of being in the band, then Oasis became famous for being Oasis, not Oasis became famous for making good music. And hence the argument that's in the Wibbling Rivalry CD, where Noel is constantly shouting music, music, music at Liam, whilst Liam is shouting about something else, God knows what, relating to being controversial, getting arrested and taking drugs, because obviously rock and roll is not about music at all, it's all about taking drugs, isn't it? One small thing I will say about this, even though this got to #2, is that There is an American CD, by the way, which features Rocking Chair on. It might be the Wonderwall CD single that has a slightly different mix of Rocking Chair on. Not something you need to lose any sleep about. This version fades in and the American mix doesn't. And that was number 2 in the charts. At the time, I liked both of them. I liked Blur, I liked Oasis. If people said to me, who do you prefer? The answer would always be Suede, then Pulp. Still is, of course, because Suede and Pulp are better than Oasis. But I'm also talking about Pulp at the same time. And one of my next ones is going to be me talking about Pulp's Different Class, which surprisingly, all of this is 30 years ago. And it doesn't feel like 30 years ago. It feels like it's about 5 years ago or something. And then I look at my hair, realise I've turned into boneheads, especially with the beard and the glasses. And, yeah. Oops. Talked myself into a corner there. Quick. Reverse, reverse. Then came the second album. Here we are. What's the story? Morning Glory. Just before that, and recorded in early September 1995, was the Help compilation album, which featured 20 songs, all of which were recorded on the same day, September the 4th, 1995, pressed onto CD and in the shops on the Friday. This features Oasis re-recording the track Fade Away with a version sung by Noel at roughly half the speed. That's roughly twice as good as the other version. Very good. This, of course, also features, and you should get this is a classic slice of 1995's musical temperature. The Stone Roses, Radiohead, Orbital, Portishead, Massive Attack, Suede, The Charlatans, Stereo MCs, Sinead O'Connor, The Levellers, The Manics, Terrorvision, Terry Hall, Salad, One World Orchestra, which is the KLF under a different name, Blur, and Paul Weller and Friends featuring Paul McCartney and Noel Gallagher re-recording Come Together. This has the definitive version of Fade Away on it, by the way, in case you're ever wondering what is the best version of that particular track. And then we had this. What's the Story? Morning Glory. Cassette, CD, LP, sold tens of millions of copies. This is not the best album of 1995. It's probably the best Oasis album, but it's also the album that sold the most copies, the one that had the most number ones, the one that was everywhere. At this point, the band could have probably formed their own country called Oasis Land, and everybody would have voted to live there. Everything suddenly became enormous, and it's a great record. Not perfect, but great. With let's just quickly check. 12 tracks on it, 10 of which have titles. So numbers 6 and 11 are instrumental excerpts called The Swamp Song. The Swamp Song was released on the CD and 12-inch of Wonderwall. It also opened all of the band shows in 95 and 96 in this touring period, or almost all of them anyway, from probably June 95 through to April 28th, 1996, and was released all over the place. This was inescapable. The first thing I will say about Morning Glory is this is a record that wasn't designed to be listened to on vinyl or CD. It was designed to be listened to on the radio, in transistors coming out of chip shops, pubs, televisions, cars passing you, motorway service stations. This is, and this is where I talk about the liveness wars, compressed to fuck. Even the quiet bits are loud, and the loud bits are even louder than that. It is sonically appalling. It's one of the worst masterings I've ever heard. And I'm not going to get deep into whether mastering is any good or not. Just imagine mastering is very similar in a visual term to contrast. They've whacked up the contrast so everything is super polarised. There's no detail in the mastering on this. And Noel himself said on the commentary to the Time Flies DVD, I don't like the sound of this album. It's horrible. And he's absolutely right. It was designed to be louder than anything else that was coming out of your speakers. And that meant that it was squashing the sound. So there was no opportunity to really hear it. Which means if you want to hear what the album sounds like at its best, probably go for a vinyl copy, because there are limitations simply given the format and the wax that's in there as to how loud the loud bits can be and how quiet and how loud the quiet bits can be as well. You're limited by that. So the vinyl edition is probably the best one to go for. I don't know what the remastered version of it sounds like, probably even louder. But in fact, the best version of What's the Story Morning Glory to listen to at all is, and I will have to check the exact format, I think the 2002 Super Audio CD that was remixed, might have been on a Blu-ray, can't remember, but that actually has the full dynamic range in it and not this super squashed mastering. So with that boring technical public service announcement out of the way, let's get into What's the Story Morning Glory, the album you probably know. So again, 12 tracks, 10 of which are vocal. Hello, Roll With It, which we've already discussed. Wonderwall, we're coming up to that in a minute. Don't Look Back in Anger. Hey Now, which I don't think the band ever played, and if they did, certainly not until many years later. Bonehead's Bank Holiday, which was meant to be sung by Bonehead, but wasn't, because Bonehead had the world's worst singing voice. Some Might Say, which you will know. Cast No Shadow, which apparently was about Richard Ashcroft of The Verve. She's Electric, Morning Glory, and Champagne Supernova. Also referred to on stage, by the way, as Champagne Super Duper. The only problem with this album, frankly, is the fact that, that the song Hello, It's Good to Be Back, steals from Gary Glitter. And if you Google Gary Glitter, you'll know the man has done some spectacularly unpleasant things and has spent not enough time in jail as consequence for that behaviour. A lot of the versions of these are second, third, fourth mixes of the tracks. The early mixes for the album were rejected. They just didn't quite capture the magic, apparently, although surely at some point there'll be a box set, probably later on this year, that will feature those in there. And instead what you have is definitive mixes of the track that really sound like the band are both not only in your room and in your face, but making an absolute racket. The true sign of a great record, in my opinion, is that it sounds like the people that are making it are standing together in the room, whacking out the noise and having a great time doing it. That's one of the key things, is it sounds real. It doesn't sound overthought. It doesn't sound overanalyzed. It sounds that it's really happening. And it is genuinely recording, and not like an assortment of sonic Lego bricks. Hello is a great track. It's funny, silly. It's got a lovely little chorus. Hello, it's good to be back, good to be back. And by the way, banger live, but technically absolute banger. Then we've got Roll With It, which again is perfectly serviceable, thoroughly average. Roll With It works out okay as an album track, but it's not, fantastic or anything. It just does its job as yet another Oasis hit single. And then we've got Wonderwall, which I will pick up separately. But the first time I heard Wonderwall was at the TV broadcast of the Glastonbury Festival in 1995. I recorded the whole thing, coverage on Channel 4. And the first time anybody, and the first time it was ever performed live, by the way, Wonderwall, was on Channel 4 acoustic by Noel. And I recorded it, stuck it onto my live tapes, and thought it was called Wonderful, because I thought, what's a Wonderwall anyway? A thought which similarly also occurred to Travis with their track Writing to Reach You. What is a Wonderwall anyway? So there you go. And then obviously the original version of the album, I don't think this happened to the reissue, is like a trifold fold out. So you've got the two vinyl discs here and here, and then you've got an extra section that effectively works as an inner sleeve. Here's the lyrics, and there's a photograph of a man, or a plastic man, inside a jar of sugar. Is it any wonder that sugar looks like cocaine? Cocaine! There's a terrible Eric Clapton once sang. And yeah, there you go. I'm going to pick up the album tracks in order, and then the individual singles as we go along. So track 5 is Hey Now, and Hey Now is not great. It's one of the worst songs that ever got onto an Oasis album. Maybe not quite as bad as Little James, but pretty bad. And it's not great. It's a B-side, really. It's a good B-side, but it's a B-side. And you think about some of the B-sides that the band had issued in and around this period. The Master Plan, Round Our Way, for example. The Swamp Song, Acquiesce, Talk Tonight. These beat the shit out of Hey Now. Hey Now isn't good enough to be on the album. So don't quite know why it's there, but it is. And, well, I'm sure Noel is laughing all the way to his mansion about my opinions about what should and shouldn't be on the album. It really doesn't matter. But like a lot of Oasis songs, the words are dictated by the melody, and you end up putting words in that don't make sense and don't help the song at all. You've got the Swamp Song, then you've got Bonehead's Bank Holiday, which is a vinyl-only track for the first two albums. Obviously, for What's the Story, Morning Glory, and Definitely Maybe, there were album-only, vinyl-only songs. Sad Song on Definitely Maybe, and Bonehead's Bank Holiday on What's the Story, Morning Glory. Apart from, I think, possibly like Japanese CDs, where they included Bonehead's Bank Holiday, which is a silly song about not very much at all, and features and doesn't feature. Oh, it does feature on the on the trifold gatefold sleeve. Boneheads Bank Holiday. You know, I need a little break to get away for a holiday so I can see the sun, because in the sun they say it's fun if you get some. And I could take a train or a boat or an aeroplane, or I could steal a car, because in a car you can get far. It just depends on what kind of car you are. Well, yeah, exactly. There's a theory that, or more correctly, a recurring lyrical motif that appears in this album a couple of times, in both in Bonehead's Bank Holiday and Champagne Supernova. The idea of getting away for a holiday. We're going to spend our week, get away for the summer, the 2 weeks. Also, of course, picked up in Blur's The Great Escape to a lesser extent. The concept of the 2 weeks in the summer where you get the holiday and you get to be the person that you want to be and to do what you want to do. I think the world has changed a little bit. Instead of most people in the country now gasping for those 2 weeks where they get the holiday in the summer, the concept of tourism has changed. It's more city breaks and summer breaks and weekend breaks and things like that. And it's more kind of around the quality of life and what you do, as opposed to constantly just slaving away in an office or a factory for 50 weeks a year and having 2 weeks holiday and that making everything okay, because it doesn't. That in itself, those 2 weeks, is just the safety valve around which the rest of society operates. And that concept has become a little strange, at least for me. I don't have big holidays. I have little weekend breaks in places and go and see bands that I like. Have a trip back to 1995. And yeah, there we are. Some might say, I've already discussed, a series of non sequiturs designed to appear meaningful. Cast No Shadow, which is writing about Richard Ashcroft of the then recently deceased band The Verve. And it's okay. I'm not quite sure what it means. I'm not sure Noel knows what it means. But as with great art, it's not what it means to the writer. It's what it means to the audience. And to some people, Cast No Shadow is amazing. And to me, it's okay. It's all right. Certainly not as bad as She's Electric, the next track. She's Electric, not played live until 2001, is bag of shite. It is not great. It is flippant. It is kind of feels like it's a game show theme tune. You know, She's Electric. She's from a family full of eccentrics, and she's done what I haven't expected, etc., etc., etc. And I'm like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a song and a bunch of words. Not good enough to be played live. Absolute crap. Complete filler, actually. And don't know why it's there. Then we have Morning Glory, the title track. Okay, so this is where I get a slight bit smutty. Morning Glory could also describe the phrase that's or the period of time that's known to some men as the morning erection. Your morning glory. Hey, what's the story? Morning glory. The idea of having woken up in the morning with a stiff British drink or something similar. Obviously, I've never had sex in my life and I never get erections. Or at least some of you might think that, because why the hell would I be talking to YouTube for hours on end about my record collection if I actually would be able to have a conversation with anybody? But there we are. It's a song basically built on a pun. Maybe not as big a pun as Andy Warhol's Erection, but still a pretty big pun. Yeah. Last track is Champagne Supernova, which was, yeah, it's fantastic. It's epic. It doesn't mean anything. What the hell's a Champagne Supernova? Nobody really knows, you know. But, you know, slowly walking down the hall faster than a cannonball, etc. It doesn't mean anything. It's a bit hip-dip dog shit. And I think in some respects, when it comes to writing lyrics for albums, somebody needs to sit the person down who's written the lyrics and go, what does it mean? What does it mean, Noel? You know, like the meme of the goose or the swan shouting at someone. What does it mean, Noel? I don't know. It doesn't have to mean anything. Well, you're going to sing it 128 times on tour. What does it mean? It doesn't matter what it means. What matters is what it makes people feel. And what it makes people feel is amazing. This is music for sticking on, for doing your hair on a Saturday night before you go out. This is the music for driving fast down a country road on a summer's evening. This is the music for making you forget the rest of your life exists. And sometimes that's what music needs to be, is it needs to be the thing that helps you forget everything else. And sometimes it even succeeds at that. So we have a couple of other releases around this period. So there was a single. This was released in Australia, and Australia only. Morning Glory, photograph taken there at Slane Castle, June 1995. This is the Morning Glory single released on CD only in Australia. It's backed with its Better People rocking chair and Live Forever live at Glastonbury. So yes, Australia got an exclusive Oasis track for a period of time in a card sleeve. Again, Morning Glory. Morning Glory had a promo single as well, a promo video which went with it. Great track. Great track. Doesn't mean anything necessarily, but great track. Obviously, at this point, Oasis could have literally released a single called My Duck Farts and it would have made number one. Except, of course, neither Wonderwall nor Don't Look Back in Anger made number one. Now, what's surprising about Wonderwall, and here is a CD single, and I was buying CD singles at those days because not only do we have the lovely mirrored surface which you can snort white substances off on a CD, it had 4 songs on it. This is one of the best EPs. I mean, Wonderwall, it's a good song, but I'm not quite sure exactly what it means. And I don't know that. And the band I used to be in, we played it live, and I still don't know what it means. But it doesn't mean that it has to mean anything. Music doesn't have to mean anything unless what it means to the people that are listening to it. Wonderwall, by the way, like a lot of Morning Glory, has Noel Gallagher on bass, and takes its name from a soundtrack album and film by George Harrison that George Harrison did the soundtrack for, which is called Wonderwall. And what does it mean? I don't know. It is backed with, again, 3 of the finest B-sides in human history. Round Our Way, which bafflingly has still not actually been reissued on vinyl since its original release in 1995. So Round Our Way is not on the master plan. It's not on the reissued box sets or anything that I know of. It's one of the great lost Oasis tracks, even though it was played 26 times and is on the Knebworth live album. Oh yeah, I haven't mentioned Knebworth yet. Round Our Way is a fantastic song because unlike all the other songs around about the same time, Round Our Way is actually just the sound of joy. Pure, unbridled, unadulterated, just joy and fun. The idea, the lyrics around, for example, and this is where I have to show how bad my eyesight is, right? Terrible. Which is, you know, round our way the birds are singing, round our way the sun shines bright, the birds sing for you because they don't already know you, they already know you. And, you know, the game is kicking off in around the park, it's 25 sides, and before it's dark, there's going to be a loser, and you know that next goal wins. Lovely. It's just pure joy of a summer's day when everyone is having a lovely time. And there aren't enough days like that in this world, God knows there aren't. The 2 other B-sides are the Swamp Song, the instrumental track, which appeared in positions 5 and 11 on the What's the Story Morning Glory LP. This one, by the way, all versions of the Swamp Song take their drums from the band's live performance at Glastonbury Festival because they are bang on it. And the Master Plan. Somewhat surprisingly, the Master Plan is referred to as one word everywhere apart from on the case to the CD, where the Master Plan is referred to as 2 songs, or more correctly 2 separate words, the Master Plan. And again, at this point, it was like, well, here's the latest 3 songs I've written. One's called The Swamp Song, one's called Round Our Way, one's called The Master Plan. Bosh, job done. And what is amazing is that this wasn't number 1. Wonderwall was kept off number 1 by 2 wankers called Robson and Jerome. And if you are either Robson or Jerome watching this, firstly, I bet you've forgotten you had a pop career, and I bet you've forgotten you had a number one. But also, pretty much everyone else has forgotten that you had a number one with a track called I Believe. I Believe, and it's not a cover of REM's I Believe in Wolves and Coyotes and Time as an Abstract. It's a cover of somebody else's song, and that kept Wonderwall off number one. But as Primal Scream said, when Whitney Houston got to number one, is, yeah, but it's Whitney Houston, it doesn't really count. It's Robson and Jerome at number one, it doesn't really count. Robson and Jerome, and music like that isn't actually music. It's a cynical ploy using sound as a form of entertainment to divert people from money. And there's no meaning to it at all. It is effectively popcorn as music. This was, well, maybe not steak and potatoes or meat and spuds. Maybe this was a burger and chips of a band, which is certainly going to be more nourishing than popcorn. But lies, and damn statistics. I'd also like to thank my furry co-worker here, Tinker, who you may or may not see flying behind me in a moment. There he is, as if by cue. Hello, little dude. Would you like to say anything about Oasis? Would you? Would you like to add anything? No, he wouldn't. He'd just like to look around. So, that's Wonderwall. Again, only got to number 2 in the charts. At this point, Oasis was an enormous industry. They were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. There were so many unofficial books written about Oasis. It was genuinely ludicrous. Of the official ones, this, Getting High, The Adventures of Oasis by Paolo Hewitt, is the best one that tells the story of the band up to the Morning Glory era with a kind of reportage approach that goes to it. And this one, Was There Then, by Jill Furmanowski, is an official kind of book of photographs in and around the Morning Glory and Be Here Now recording. Absolutely fascinating insights, both of them. But the band was so big, so huge, is that, you know, they just came to the point where they instantly went into arenas. I saw them in Cardiff, playing Cardiff Arena on the 18th of March 1996, which at that point, only a mere 12,000 people, was one of the smallest and most intimate shows of the UK tour. And the band were playing absolutely everywhere. So March 1996, they played Fairfax, Virginia. Here's one of the Super Golden Radio Show radio broadcast discs from that period of time, which is effectively a fantastic officially recorded and mixed live album, which was never released. The band also played Main Road in Manchester on the 27th and 28th of April. And here is a mixing desk recording of the band at that show, featuring, oddly enough, even spitting image puppets. The band had become spitting image puppets. They were so popular. And that in itself is a pretty surprising stroke, amazing kind of thing to happen, is that the band was so big at that point, is that they could play 2 shows at Main Road in Manchester. And those 2 shows, by the way, were captured, at least in part, on the There and Then home VHS that was released in September 1996. This featured about 10 songs from Manchester and about 8 songs from London Earls Court, where the band played to 20,000 people a night indoors in London. It was enormous. It was stratospheric. And there were just points where I was just kind of like, you know, the gif of Michael Jackson just chewing pop and going, the band can't get any bigger than this. And it's like, oh yeah, we're going to headline the Moon. Right. Okay. Oh, and by the way, we sold it out in 10 seconds. That type of thing. Around about the time that Oasis played Cardiff, they also released the 4th and final single from the album, Don't Look Back in Anger. This features a track called Step Out, which is heavily based apparently on a Stevie Wonder track, All Right Uptight, also Underneath the Sky, and a cover of the mighty Slade's Come On Feel the Noise. Come On Feel the Noise was played live by Oasis 3 times, once for a TV show and twice in the final encore position at Main Road there at the bottom. Come On Feel the Noise. Girls, grab your boys. And yeah, great song. The other thing that we would have is that the track 3 on this, Underneath the Sky, was inspired by Airport Books, the tiny book of wisdom, where you're suddenly going, well, none of the words actually make sense. It's just when you stick them all together, you end up with about 10, 15 lines of random gibberish that kind of work. And some might say there's no such thing as heaven. Tell that to the man that lives in hell. So, Noel Gallagher isn't even writing his own lines at that point, but nobody really cares. Everyone thinks, the genius of it, the guts, the gall. And talking of things that had guts and gall, Champagne Supernova got a release in America as a CD single, and this was backed with a radio edit, an album version, and a copy of Slide Away taken from the album Definitely Maybe. Do wish they'd put proper B-sides on this. There's quite a lot of songs from this era, like for example the re-recording of Fade Away, that could have been on the B-side of the CD single, but they chose not to. And of course, the band was still rambling on, being absolutely huge. Don't Look Back in Anger only got to number 2 in the charts, or maybe it got to number 1. It got to number 1. And the video featured Patrick McNee, the Avenger, also from one of the better James Bond films, A View to a Kill. Come On, Feel the Noise got a promo 12-inch release. It was backed with the Champagne Supernova Lynch Mob Beats mix. This one's pretty beat up, but I bought it because it had the remix of Champagne Supernova on. I didn't realise it was going to become so rare in future. Lots of these things, of course, were also heavily bootlegged. And talking of heavily bootlegged, the band then announced their next shows at Knebworth. They were going to headline Knebworth, good God, Knebworth, to 250,000 people over the course of 2 nights. Now, I've done a separate video about Knebworth when it came out, but it is actually now the definitive Oasis live album and DVD. So here, first and foremost, here's the bootleg CD of Knebworth. The show itself was absolutely enormous and huge. Over 2 million people applied for it. In fact, so many so that they could have done 20 nights at Knebworth. I, like a lot of people, got the postcard in the mail telling me that Oasis were playing there, and it was originally it was only going to be 1 night, Saturday the 10th of August, but then they sold 2, and they could have put another 3 or 4 weekends on, but they chose not to. And it was only £22.50, which for that you wouldn't even pay that in booking fees to see Oasis these days. In 2021, the Oasis Knebworth 1996 bootleg finally became obsolete. By the way, the Oasis 96 bootleg featured all the songs from the second night up to Don't Look Back in Anger, and then the remaining 3, Live Forever, Champagne Supernova and On the Walrus, were taken from the Saturday night because the band played 2 songs, It's Getting Better Man and My Big Mouth, from an upcoming LP yet to be titled, and so they didn't want people to hear that on the bootleg, so the radio broadcast is the 11th up to Don't Look Back in Anger and the 10th from Live Forever onwards. I bought this because everybody bought this. If you were a kid who liked Oasis, you had to buy it. You didn't get a choice. That was the law. You had to buy it. Instead, in 2021, obviously it was superseded by the Live at Knebworth home release. Here's the 3 CD featuring the documentary plus the 2 shows. And here is the triple LP that features a compilation of material from the 2 nights on vinyl. Apparently vinyl is God's way of telling you you make too much money. Well, actually, no, cocaine is God's way of telling you make too much money. And good God, Oasis made too much money out of this LP, and more correctly, out of this period. Headlining Knebworth means you never have to worrying about paying your gas bill ever again when you've sold 250,000 tickets. If you do worry about paying your gas bill ever again, you've clearly snorted it all up your nose. Knebworth is a good live album. It's probably the best and most representative, definitive document that captures Oasis live, certainly during their glory years, and with the band's definitive lineup. But they weren't just playing Knebworth, they were playing loads of other places. They played Stockholm, Here's a tour programme for Stockholm. I didn't see them in Stockholm, but they printed too many tour programmes for Stockholm. And you ended up with a kind of self-mythologising kind of comment. So just quickly take the opening paragraph to the tour booklet, which is, you're the best fans, they're the best band. It's the best music. Why make it popular? Why make it complicated? Just have a good time, give in to the tingles, and never forget that you're the reason Oasis do what they do. And that's it, isn't it? The mistake of being biggest with being best. Because biggest is not always the same as best. It absolutely isn't. And in fact, if anything, Oasis became too big at this point because they couldn't keep hold of what they had. Coming straight off Knebworth, of course, the band then carried on playing. They played MTV Unplugged, where Liam, in an act that was politely described by Jill Furmanowski as grossly unprofessional, but in my opinion was Liam being a fucking idiot, decided it was more important to go to the pub and get trashed than it was to go and sing MTV Unplugged at the Royal Festival Hall to 2,000 people and millions of viewers, because let's not muck about here, Liam was a fucking idiot. Certainly was at that point, might be now, I don't know. Bootlegs came flying left, right and centre. Oasis's red and blue albums were released, which these were unofficial B-sides compilations that covered the band at certain periods in their history. The band also put out a promo, actually, in late 1996, just to plug their old singles. So here's a 4-track CD of B-sides featuring Fade Away, Half the World Away, Acquiesce and The Master Plan. This was released to record stores and to other places just to sell the singles. So someone go, what track's this? Go, oh, it's Oasis's Acquiesce, it's on the Roll With It single, or it's on the Some Might Say single. So if you want to hear that, you have to buy the singles. The band also did singles box sets. So in case you'd bought previous singles or hadn't, you could buy all the 4 CD singles from the period in a What's the Story, Morning Glory promotional box set. It came with an interview disc. And let's not forget the good old sell-through VHS There and Then, which even if you weren't that bothered about it, also came with a CD of 3 tracks featuring Wonderwall live at Earl's Court, Cigarettes and Alcohol at Main Road, and Champagne Supernova from Knebworth. Bloody hell, it never stopped, did it? Of course it didn't stop. There was this period, this cultural period at the time, where everything had come together, and the band were almost like leading the forehead of how great Britain was. And at the time, it just felt really, really strange to be part of it, because I was living through this, and it wasn't just history, it was Sunday, it was Saturday, it was that type of thing. I was at home with a C90 recording Oasis at Knebworth, that type of thing. The album itself, it's good, but it's not great. But what it represents is a period in time when history kind of took over, and suddenly the mythologising has become far more important than the actual events. You know, some of it was not amazing. You know, Liam was getting drunk and not shaving and turning up looking absolutely like he'd been dragged through a hedge backwards. All those type of things. Songs were, you know, Hey Now was grossly overrated, for example. I don't think anybody pretended it was fantastic at the time. It's only in the rearview mirror, once these things have gone past, and, you know, after spending 10 weeks at #1 in the UK chart, that you kind of realise, yeah, I was living through this period of history, experiencing it on a day-to-day basis, and wondering what it was all like when you come back out through the other side of it. The shows themselves, some of them were absolutely euphoric. The Cardiff show was phenomenal and has been broadcast on the radio and is apparently one of the best Oasis gigs of all time. I don't know, because I wasn't at all the others, but it was a damn fine show. But it was this sense of, like, it was Saturday night and everybody was on the winning team and they just scored the winning goal, and every song was another winning goal. It was really quite an experience to be a fan of Oasis at that point in time. But it wasn't enough. As Noel Gallagher would joke, he wants more. The band went back on tour. They went back to America and they imploded. They just couldn't do it. Knebworth should have been the end. They said at the time Knebworth should have been at the end. Absolutely right. Knebworth should have been the full stop, the final end of the period where you headline to 200,000, 250,000 people, and then you go off into the future with the next step. But no, they went back into arenas in America, barely lasted 3 weeks, fell to bits and collapsed. And that was the end of the Morning Glory period. 2014 saw the release of the 3 CD edition reissue of the album. The second disc is almost all the B-sides, including You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, the Beatles cover that is only otherwise available on the Japanese CD single of Some Might Say. And the Japanese CD single of Some Might Say, which is somewhere down here, also features a previously unreleased demo recording of Some Might Say, featuring Tony McCarroll on drums, taken from a soundtrack in Japan, of all places, I think, sung by Noel, and at about half the speed. It's staggering that the final version is as good as it is, because that demo is terrible. The third CD on here features a mixture of live songs and demos. So demos of Some Might Say, that's a different version of it, She's Electric, Rocking Chair, Hey Now, Bonehead's Bank Holiday, and live tracks from Acquiesce, Some Might Say, Talk Tonight, Hello, Roll With It, Morning Glory, Round Our Way from MTV Unplugged, Cast No Shadow at Main Road, and The Master Plan live at Knebworth. What the period needed at the time, and always had done, was an official live album. And of course, in 2021, that's exactly what we got. I also managed to pick up the big fancy book that comes with the fancy box set version of the 2014 reissue, because it was standing on its own, this for about £2 in a shop. And I thought, well, I'll buy that. It's got handwritten lyrics and all that type of stuff in it. It's very good. But to me, it seems really, really weird that all this stuff is happening, because I was there then. I was experiencing it at the time. It was strange. It was unusual. It was bizarre, beautiful, odd, so strange to suddenly see all these things happening that were like, really? You know, all of this? The bands that I like are suddenly huge. The music that I like is massive. The things that I know, the places that I know, the clubs that I've been, didn't belong to me anymore. They belong to other people. They belong to everybody. And of course, gatekeeping and elitism is something that you shouldn't really do. It's something that I did a little bit, but that was more because those were the places that I went to escape from the things that I didn't like in life. And sometimes the things that I didn't like in life were starting to become parts of the rest of everything else, the reality that I was having to live in. So What's the Story, Morning Glory is a very, very good LP. The lyrics are sometimes absolute garbage, make no mistake about it. There's a couple of songs on the album that aren't amazing, and I think that if I hadn't lived this period at the time and I'd come back to it later on, I think perhaps I would have been less enamoured with it. To me, this is one of the very few records that actually exists really only in the time in which it happened, and had I not lived through it, it would have not had any of the same meaning to me that it does now. This is the sound, to me, of a glorious optimism that existed briefly for a couple of summers in Britain in 1995, 1996. The sense that the Conservative Party were going to be voted out, that Labour were going to come in, that the future was going to be better, that the future was so bright that you were going to have to wear shades. That was the sense I got at the time in that summer, and that was reinforced with Blur, reinforced with Pulp, Suede, the Manics, all these other amazing things that were happening at the same time. But as we know, when you live in a bubble, sometimes the bubble bursts. And that was what was to come next. Because having gone from Was There Then, they had to go to Be Here Now. And instead of waxing lyrical about the past, you had to live in the present. And the present, as we were shortly to find out, was somewhere that wasn't so amazing, either for us or for Oasis. So the Morning Glory was going to turn from the afternoon delight into the morning after. And that is for the next episode. So, if you've lived with 58 minutes of me monologuing at you about Oasis, fantastic, longer than the album, go off, watch a YouTube video of Oasis live at Knebworth, have a fantastic time playing air guitar, and I will see you in a future episode. If you've watched this and gone, "Core blimey, what a wanker," don't bother commenting. I probably know that anyway, thanks very much. But do obviously just go and watch the music, because that's what it's all about. It's about what the music does and what the music means to you, and nothing else really matters, because if the music doesn't mean anything to you, find music that does. Life is too short for bad food, bad girlfriends, boyfriends, family members, or food. Take care of yourselves and each other, stay beautiful, and I will see you all soon. Okay, thank you very much. Good night.